I've been meaning to make this video for a while, but I haven't for a couple of reasons. I didn't know whether I wanted to share this sort of information with everyone online, but I also wasn't sure whether it was super relevant to fitness and what I do, but I think there's more just to fitness than training and going to the gym, you know, like there's always a reason behind it and a story behind it as to why you go and why you want to change and what drives you. So this is my story around how, I guess, traumatic experiences in my childhood in a way shaped who I am today and why it drives me to be the person I can be. Now, let me preface this in just saying that in no way, shape or form did I have a really traumatic childhood. Like, I don't want to over exaggerate this and make it sound like I am a victim in some way and I was like fucking abused, which I wasn't. But there was a couple or a few years in my life where there was some rougher times and some rougher moments. So just to give you a bit of an idea, my parents had split up when I was 5, and from probably about the age of maybe 8 to 14, maybe 13, my mum was with this other guy, probably even earlier, but he became a bit of an asshole when I was probably around 8. Anyway, I'm not going to go into too many details because there are some things that are private and personal, obviously, but there is a story and a message behind this, which is why I wanted to make this video. And I know my mum will probably watch this too, and she's cool with me talking about this sort of stuff. So anyway, she struggled a lot with alcohol addiction, which she's like totally clean now, and I'm super proud of her. And yeah, really, really proud of her actually. And it's so good to see because it's something that is so hard to get clean off, drugs or alcohol in any way. And yeah, she went to rehab to get herself better, which she did for a really, really good while. And she met a guy in rehab. I'm not going to say his name. I'm going to call him John, right? I'm not going to say his real name. Anyway, John in the beginning was lovely. He was nice. He was charming. He was good to me. He was good to his kids. He seemed like a good guy, and he was in rehab for drug abuse. So his weapons of choice were like meth. He was a bit of a crackhead. And in the beginning, he was great. You know, I'd go to rehab, go visit like my mum there, and we jump in the pool and whatever and have a really good time, right? Anyway, fast forward a couple of years. I got to mum's sort of every weekend, and I'd spend the week with my dad usually throughout the week. He was a single dad for most of my life, and yeah, he's done a fantastic job. Like, I'm so grateful for everything my dad has done in my life and my mum. Like, my parents are amazing. You know, they've got no wrong in this at all. I will say that. And anyway, so this guy, John, we'll call him. I used to go visit them every weekend, and he was sort of in and out of relapsing, and he was actually, I don't think he really was off drugs, to be honest. While he was in rehab too, he would get on the weekends, and he'd come back and he'd be like, you know, buzzing, and then he'd crash, and then he'd get a bit of an itch throughout the week, and he'd get on it again on the weekend. So that's sort of what it was like. And for a good couple of years, it was great. And I'd go up and visit them, and they had they had a nice place. They had their life on track. He had his 2 kids as well, who I got along with really well. And yeah, it was pretty good. We go up and we do some cool shit. It was up in like Brisbane, so we go out to like Manly. We go to the swimming pools, and we just go do cool things. Anyway, there was probably a period from maybe when I was about 10ish to maybe 13, probably 3 or 4 years, maybe 2 or 3, where he was abusing drugs pretty bad, and things got pretty rough between him and mum. And she was sort of almost trapped in this relationship in a way. Look, it's a whole other topic, DV and domestic violence, which I don't really want to go into, you know, whether you say, you know, the woman in the relationship should just leave or whatever, right? It's a whole nother rabbit hole, which I'm not going to go into. Anyway, yeah, they argued fairly often whether it was over money or whether he was angry over drugs or whether he was drinking. His weapon of choice was rum, and he'd always get angry and pissed off, and he'd yell at mum, or he'd yell at me, or he'd yell at his kids. And he was pretty nasty guy sometimes. So I'd go up on weekends and go visit them, and sometimes shit would hit the fan. You know, me and his his sons would have to leave the house because he'd be like yelling and abusing mum in some way. They'd be, yelling back and forth with each other. The whole street would hear, and we'd be sitting out there like, crying or, like just wondering what's going on, sort of with our heads down. And it was pretty scary, and there were some pretty freaky moments, to be honest. So yeah, that was pretty rough for a while. And I go back to Dad's throughout the week, but it was this interesting bittersweet feeling because I loved my mum, and I loved her when I was a kid, and she was so good to me, and I had a really good time when I was with her and when they weren't arguing. So I used to love going there, and then I sort of like come back home. I love coming back home too, but then, you got to go back to school and everything. And there's all these like things that you don't want to do, responsibilities, going there was like fun, and we do some cool shit. But yeah, it was a bittersweet feeling leaving sometimes, but then you'd always have that like little bit of worry every time you go there as to what he's going to be like. And there was a good period, just to like put this into perspective, just as to how sort of downhill it went over time. They were living in a fairly nice place in I think Balmoral or Manly or something in like sort of that East Brisbane side. And each time they moved houses, the house got progressively worse and worse and worse because he was abusing drugs and he wasn't paying rent, and he was just being an absolute shit kicker, drop kick, which he was. And they'd move from house to house, and every time it would get slightly worse, and then they'd have to get kicked out and they'd have to go somewhere else because he wasn't paying the rent. Even my dad was like helping them out, and he's such a lovely, giving guy. He'd help my mum out with rent and things like that. So they were all sort of like, mum and dad were working towards me having the best life possible. I obviously wanted to see mum. He wanted me to see mum. Mum wanted to see me. But there's this fuckhead in the background who was just a cunt. Let's just put it like that. So he'd get angry, he'd get abusive, he'd never like hit me or touch me. I do want to say that, but yeah, he'd yell, he'd get angry, he'd be drunk, he'd yell at mum. We used to leave when it got pretty bad, so I didn't see much, but I assume he probably physically abused her as well. It's the kind of guy he was like. I won't say for certain if he did, because I never really witnessed it that much, but I don't know, you put two and two together, rum, alcohol, angry cunt, drugs, So yeah, anyway, so where I'm going with this is life was hard for a little bit. And in those times, you learn to be strong, and you learn to be alone, and you learn that like tough times never last, and that life is hard sometimes, but you have to push through it because you'll come out the other side better. And I had to learn to become an adult in those situations pretty damn quickly. And I had to learn to become mature pretty quickly because I have these two of his sons as well who are younger than me, and I sort of have to like look after them in a way too. When shit hits the fan, you have to sort of comfort them a little bit. So I sort of took on that role a little bit, as well as making sure my mum was okay and making sure that she might not be drinking. And it's a lot to take on like as a young kid. So yeah, and this will all make sense sort of towards the end as to why I'm talking about all this. They went to this one house as their last house that they were in together. And it was in the middle of Brisbane in a place called Highgate Hill, which is like, it's in a pretty nice area actually. And there's some nice spots there, and it's pretty expensive to live in. But this place they had was an absolute dump. It was an absolute shithole. The place had been built in the early 1900s, and there hadn't been a single bit of work done that whole time it was there. And it was fucked. Like the paint was all coming off, and there was like broken floorboards everywhere. The stairs at the back were rickety. You wouldn't want to walk down them because they were all cracked and moldy, and they had holes in them, so you wouldn't want to walk downstairs. It was overgrown. The windows wouldn't close properly. There was no carpets, no wall decor. It was just this like white paint peeling, wooden, broken house. The shower was horrible. It wasn't a nice place at all. So that was their sort of last place that they went to in Brisbane. And yeah, so I used to go there, and I remember walking in there for the first time, and my mum was like, this place is rough. Like, you're either going to like it and say it has a bit of character, or you're going to hate it. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I walked in there and I was like, what the hell is this? This is like, You know, she made the place as clean as it could be. You know, she was great like that, but it was a bit of a dump. It was a dump. There was junkies next door, you know. Anyway, so this was sort of like the peak of what I experienced in my time there. And there was one night in particular that was a turning point in my life, which I look back on now, and it makes me emotional even talking about it, because it genuinely, I go back to this every time I go to some sort of like dark place, or when I'm lifting, or when I'm thinking about what I want in my life. I go back to this particular moment because this sort of like defined me in a way. So they were having a bit of an argument one night, and they were going off, and he was off. He was drunk, and he was yelling, and as he does, but he was pretty bad this one night, and it was really bad. We couldn't exactly go outside or anywhere because we were in the middle of the city. You know, we're not going to hang out on the streets of the city. So we were inside, and we were just listening to this. And their room was sort of like there, our room was here, it was just next to each other. There was this sledgehammer in our room for whatever reason. I don't know, they must be doing some sort of renovations, but it was this big sledgehammer. It was probably like a good like meter sledgehammer, maybe even more. And it was heavy. And they were going at it, and I was crying, and I was having a rough time. I could not hold it together that night. I was really upset because they were going hard at it. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I can't do anything. Like, I felt helpless, and I felt like I couldn't protect my mum. I felt like I couldn't protect, you know, my stepbrothers at the time. But I did what I could. So I grabbed this sledgehammer, and I stood behind this door, and I remember it was like it was yesterday. I must have been like 12, you know, maybe 13. And I held this sledgehammer up, and I remember thinking to myself, if this guy comes through this door, I'm going to fucking hit him over the head with this sledgehammer as hard as I possibly can. And I would have in that moment. I 100% would have in that moment. Who knows what would have happened? You know, spoiler alert, I didn't. He never came through that door, but I sat there for a good minute or two holding this sledgehammer, crying, thinking I'm going to hit this guy. Yeah, like that was a really defining moment in my life there. And I look back at that now thinking like, shit, I felt so helpless in that moment. I felt like I couldn't do anything. You know, I was scared, and I was going to do this act that no 12 or 13-year-old should do or should be even thinking about. And every time now when I lift, you know, when I go for my deadlifts, you'll see me pulling like 260, 265 kilos, whatever, or whipping up 240 for reps. I'm thinking about that moment every single time. I'm thinking about that moment, and I'm thinking about him standing there, and it gets me so fucking angry, you know, every time. So yeah, that was pretty rough, that moment. And I'll go back to more on how that sort of helps me in a minute. There was another time later in my life, probably a year or two after that, where they had split up, and she was staying with us at the time, with me and Dad, and she was sort of like, yeah, she was living with us for a little bit. Even though they were split up, we were sort of helping her. Anyway, he found out where she was. This is after she left him, which was not long after that moment, trust. So one night he found out where we lived. I think I might have taken them there one time a couple of years ago just to show them where I live, which was stupid, but I was like 10, so you know, like what else is a 10-year-old? 10-year-old's not going to think about that stuff. So he came to our house at maybe 8, 9, 10 p.m. I was sitting there on the couch, and he was just banging on he came up and he just started banging on the door, and he was saying my mum's name, and he was yelling and saying like, where the fuck is she? Where is she? And he was like, I'm going to come and kill your dogs. I'm going to burn this house down. He was going off. He was going nuts. And same thing. I was sitting there in that moment, and I thought to myself, I am absolutely helpless. I was sitting here, I was crying, I was freaking out. I was probably like 13, 14 at the time. Dad was freaking out, you know, Mum was freaking out. We had this guy who was off his head on ice, banging on our door, wanting to come in and see her and do fuck knows what to us. He hated my dad. He hated me at that time. And yeah, like, luckily he didn't get in, and he was sitting there banging on the door for maybe a solid 10, 15 minutes, and then he gave up. But my God, that was scary. That was absolutely terrifying. Dad called his mates over, who was some like fairly well connected people. Let's just say that. They knew some people, and they came and just sat in our lounge, just chilled there for the night just to make sure he didn't come back, which I was super, super grateful for. And everything was okay until the morning. But that moment was very, very, very scary. And you like when someone's in that state, as you know, if you've been around that before, you do not know what they're going to do. They're incredibly, incredibly unpredictable. And he was a very violent guy. So, yeah. Where I'm going with this now, let me tie this all together, because you're like, Rylan, why are you just telling me your whole entire life story? Well, instead of looking at that and using it as a victim card and being like, oh, my childhood was so terrible, you know, it was so traumatic, whatever, which like it wasn't. Like 95, 99% of my childhood was great. It was just those moments that were fucked, you know, and my parents did everything they could to protect me from that. It is what it is. And I'm past that, and they're past that, and we all have a good life now. But instead of looking at those moments and playing a bit of a victim card and being like, oh man, yeah, it was so terrible, it was so tragic, and just like leaning on that to be lazy, or I don't know, like it's never even been an option for me, so I don't even know what that would look like. My point is, where I'm going with this is, I saw what drugs, what alcohol, what living a shitty quality of life can do to you. I saw a man that I didn't want to be, and I wanted to be as far away from that as humanly possible. I saw something, many things that traumatized me and made me think as a young kid, I never want my kids to experience this. I felt helpless in those moments, and I thought, I'm never going to be helpless again. I am going to make sure I train, I become big, I become the guy who can protect my family, who can protect my kids. You know, if anyone ever was like that to my partner, obviously she wouldn't be with him, but someone ever approached us who was like that, or he came back one day and he tried to find my mum, which is, it's a possibility, you know, that I'm able to be the man that can now protect my family. And yeah, this is like, that was a big part of as to why I wanted to bulk up and why I wanted to change, because like up until probably I was about like 12 years old, I was like fairly chubby. And then as you know, a lot of you guys may be watching, you may have experienced this too. You end up having a bit of a growth spurt, you know, you shoot up and you become tall and slender and skinny and lanky, which is what I was in the end. And that's sort of what I became. And yeah, I was always sort of that skinny guy, and that's what made me want to bulk up. And the moral of the story here is, if you have traumatic experiences or events that happen in your life, don't dwell on them. Don't look at them and play a victim card. You know, who gives a fuck? It happened. But learn from those experiences and use it to your advantage. If you've had anything like that happen in your life, make it a positive. My mum's living a great life now, and my dad's living a great life. I'm living a great life. I have my partner. I have a dog. I've gained 30 kilos since that moment. I feel big. I feel strong. I feel like I can protect my family. And that is all I've ever wanted. And I feel, not to toot my own horn, but I feel like I'm so proud of myself for being able to do that. And my message to you is, be that man that can protect your family. Be that man who can protect your partner. Be the best man you can be to ensure that something like that never happens to you, that you never turn into that guy. And it's repelled me from a lot of things, which I think is great. I've never done drugs, never tried a single drug. I've never smoked a ciggy in my life, ever, you know. People will see that and some people will see this and go, oh wow, he thinks he's so good. Yeah, fucking oath I do. Some people, like I've never smoked a ciggy. I've never touched a vape. I've drank before, but like that's totally put me off drinking. And I'll maybe drink once every 3 months, or I'll have a beer if I'm watching a game of football like I did in America a few weeks ago. And yeah, that's about it. That was a huge part of my life that I never share on here. But I really hope my mission with saying this is that it's helped, inspired you in some way. And another little lesson to take out from this is, when you're training in the gym, train like a mad cunt. Bring yourself back to some of those dark places you've been to if you've been there before, because it's helped me. and I always do it during my sessions. But find a good enough reason to want to change. And if you relate to my story at all, message me. I'd love to have a chat with you. I think that's awesome. And I think if you're wanting to better yourself, to get as far away from people like that fuckwit as possible, I think that's unreal. And that for me is my mission. And that is why I help guys like you. That is why I wanted to bulk up myself. And that's ultimately why I'm the man I am, who I am today. And that's why I will keep becoming the best man I can be. And I'm always going to strive towards that. Whew. Always been nervous to make this video, but I feel better now. See you soon.